This is the story of a 60-year-old clergy who had lived for years with a massive goiter. It had grown slowly, at first just a small swelling in his neck, but over time it became enormous, a burden both physically and emotionally. Like many in his community, he'd heard terrifying stories about surgery. Whispers of people who went in and never came out, of complications and untimely deaths. These fears held him back, but the goiter was relentless. It grew so large that it began to press on his windpipe. Breathing became difficult, and at night he snored so loudly that sleep was no longer restful. He would wake up gasping for air, a frightening experience for both him and his wife. Then one day he sat in my consultation room with his wife beside him. Their faces were filled with worry. He told me about his fears, how people had warned him against surgery, how he had convinced himself that he would die if he went under the knife, but now he had no choice. He was struggling to breathe, and he knew the time had come to act. I reassured him. Our team had done countless similar surgeries. It was a safe and well-established procedure. With proper preparation, he would be fine, but the decision was his. Weeks passed. They thought about it, prayed about it, and finally he returned. He was ready. We conducted a series of pre-operative tests, ensuring he was fit for surgery. He was admitted the day before, and after fasting overnight, he was taken to the operating theatre. Once inside, the surgical team went through the standard safety checklist. Everything was set. General anesthesia was administered, muscle relaxants given, and he was intubated. The operating table was positioned, the area prepped. A cosmetic incision was made in the neck and the surgery began. The goiter, which had taken years to grow, was carefully dissected away in just under 2 hours. The delicate nerves controlling his voice were identified and preserved. Blood vessels were secured to prevent bleeding. It was a smooth, textbook surgery. Finally, the field was dry. The wound was closed, a firm dressing applied, and anesthesia was reversed. Slowly, he woke up. He had made it. The first 24 hours passed uneventfully. He was closely monitored in the ward, and everything seemed fine. His breathing was normal. There were no signs of distress. The surgical team had a packed schedule the next day. More cases to operate on, more lives to save. As we moved from one procedure to another, I found myself needing to retrieve something from the call room. As I walked past the surgical ward, something made me glance through the window. And that's when I saw it. He was clutching his throat, his face contorted in agony. His mouth opened and closed, struggling for breath, but no sound came out. His eyes were wide with panic. He was drowning in the very air he fought to inhale. Time seemed to freeze. The ward was full of other patients and medical staff, yet no one had noticed. In seconds, I was by his side. His lips were turning blue, his body slumped, unconscious. I knew instantly what had happened. Tension hematoma. Blood had accumulated in the space left behind after surgery, forming a tight mass that compressed his airway. He had minutes, maybe seconds, before it was too late. There was no time to wait, no time to rush him back to the theatre, no time to hesitate. With practiced hands, I grabbed a blade and reopened the fresh surgical wound right there at the bedside. Blood gushed out, dark and thick. The clot broke free, releasing the pressure that had been choking him. And then, a gasp. His body convulsed slightly, his eyes flickered open, air rushed back into his lungs. He was alive. But we weren't done yet. We had to find the source of the bleeding and stop it permanently. He was wheeled back into the theatre, where we identified and secured the culprit vessel. It was a close call, too close. A week later, he sat in my office once more, his wife by his side. This time, their faces held gratitude instead of fear. I recounted the events to them, how close he had come to losing his life, how divine intervention and timely action had saved him. He shook his head in disbelief. The very thing he had feared the most, surgery, had nearly become a self-fulfilling prophecy, but fate had other plans. His story is a reminder of how quickly medical emergencies can develop. It highlights the gaps in overwhelmed healthcare systems where a critical moment can be missed if vigilance slips for even a second. If I had not looked through that window, if I had not been there at that moment, his story might have had a different ending. Always be observant, whether you are a patient, a caregiver, or a healthcare worker. Emergencies don't announce themselves, they strike without warning. And sometimes it takes just one moment, one action to save a life. The man who could not breathe lived to tell his story. Join me next week for another real-life medical story. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell so you don't miss it.